Okay, hello. We started this meeting without recording. I'm just going to say shortly, we made an introduction about making partial changes without losing our values and boundaries. And can we make these changes? Can we discuss them? Can we discuss making small changes without losing our identity and our values? And Mark, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'm trying to explore the idea of how do you make changes that are effective, that people will abide by. In other words, you can attempt to make changes by forcing people to do something that they do not want to do. That, in my mind, is not progress. It's the opposite of progress. So the question of making progress is that we must have a discussion, a true discussion, a debate, where each side in the debate respects the other and submits and supports, and Rabbi, you did this brilliantly in my view, supports their opinion and allows the so-called court of public opinion to debate the other side and to see whether this is something that will satisfy the need to change, not change for change's sake, but will satisfy the need to change. And it seems to me that one of the great strengths of Judaism is that that's typically the way things happen. There's no central court, there's no pope to say, you must do this. That doesn't exist in Judaism. Somehow, something happens, some person makes some suggestion, some idea, perhaps a little bit more formal than that, and maybe it catches on and maybe it doesn't. And if it doesn't catch on, it withers away. And if it does catch on, it catches on because people accept it. But this can only happen through debate and through respectful debate. And that's something that we are sorely lacking right now.
I would just like to comment that a weakness and a strength, but I think it's much more a strength than a weakness, is the ability of Judaism to take things slowly. Meaning we don't have to make extreme changes and either accept them or reject them. We can live within a process, and it might take a few generations. And then sometimes we're behind because something's running ahead and we're not in the front of the maybe the necessary change. But on the other hand, when this change is done, is completed, either it's accepted or rejected. Sometimes people ran so far ahead that they went head over heels and they got lost. And Judaism didn't get lost in that way. And we have the ability to exist, to continue existing in the long run better by making whatever changes are necessary, but doing them slowly than by running and accepting every change. So we do have to take things in a certain sense of doing things gradually and slowly, and not necessarily. And sometimes there's a pendulum, and one year it seems that wow, we have to run in that direction, and a few years later everybody's running in the opposite direction, and we have to look for the right balance.
Excuse me, Judaism has a way. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh, Judaism has a method and a way of dealing with things, upcoming things. We have somehow figured out how to work with electricity, which we didn't have before, and now we have methods of somehow dealing with it and working with it. In Judaism has the tools, I think, to deal with many issues. The question is that I think we're having basically, the problem is that we live in two systems. One is our own Jewish system, and then we live in the general system, and the values that system has. And it's very conflicting for many people to, in one system it says not allowed, and the other system says allowed. Now, what do? Judaism usually finds a way of using sources like you gave us and figuring out a way that you can somehow include that new thing that's happening into Judaism somehow in some form, which I think is a very important thing, but it's still difficult. It takes time to adjust to these ideas because they're new and we're not used to them, and but I think that at least we are trying. Not everybody agrees, but at least we try. So I think it's a positive thing.
I would just comment shortly that there are two ways of kind of living with this dual, these dual value systems that sometimes are very different. One of them is a learned attitude. You rationalize, you analyze everything, you discuss it, you come to a decision of a court ruling, a Beit Din ruling. Do we accept something or we don't? The other is more in life. It's spontaneous. In one generation, it's spontaneous, and if you do it, you're called all kinds of names. And maybe a couple of years later, it is accepted, and it's not so much philosophical. Or do we feel this has something right about it or not? But we could be wrong. We could be saying yes, and in the long run, we're going to understand why we were wrong. So it's all part of.
But society itself reacts to these things and makes some and decides, but about certain things that to be accepted and others be rejected. So I think society has large numbers in society have a voice, and I guess Judaism has room for this, and people have to listen.
Okay, Michael.
I think my answer to that is that's lovely, but number one, I don't see that Judaism has to accept everything that comes along just to get along in the society. I know that's probably not what you're saying, Tova.
No,
but
that's not what I'm saying.
Right. But I think that is sort of the first step sometimes down that slippery slope, and you don't know where you're going to wind up. I'd like to take this in a different approach. We just finished Hanukkah, and learning more during Hanukkah, it struck me to take it right back to why did we rebel? Why did all of that even happen? And it was because one culture was trying to wipe out another culture. It was our culture that was being assaulted by the Greeks and by the Jews that were seduced into following Hellenism.
Mhm.
I kind of see the progressive movement today as going down those same lines. They're not interested in accommodating anything that we would consider just normative behavior. Judaism, very much of it seems to me, is about establishing guidelines and
Of course.
Boundaries.
Of course.
They don't want any of those things.
That's part of Judaism, the boundaries.
So the progressive left, whether you're going to talk about the sexual immorality part of it, the throw out the reality of biology part of it, how you behave in society, they really don't want any of the boundaries that we would consider normal. And they're perfectly willing to jam it down our throats. So my question is not so much how do you accommodate, but how do you fight it? How do you preserve what needs to be preserved? And I think that's going to be the battle of the decades to come.
And I would say there's a side of me that certainly identifies with what you're saying. There is a violent aspect to to these movements or changes that you're discussing. You mentioned it in what you wrote, and I quoted before. At the same time, I would say, are there certain, or not are there? Let me change that from question to an exclamation mark. I think there are religious groups that are making a mistake. Instead of differentiating between accepting certain things and not accepting others, they're saying, since they're jamming this down our throat, we're going to fight back and reject everything. And I'm not sure that's a good reaction. To think that there's nothing in all of this movement, it's all just false, and or try and put in place a suggestion of, for instance, and I think it's not so far, if not identical. I don't think it's identical. I think it's not so far from what you said in our previous session. And that is, there's a difference between accepting something that people are different than the norm. There's a majority and a minority. The minority exists, and we don't have to be disrespectful towards this minority, but it doesn't mean that society has to run in a way that everything has to be according to the minority. And I would say this about same-sex attraction.
Right.
People, that's one of the questions. Do you accept that there are people, this is not because of something psychological, it's not because of the decision that they're making, it's not because they want to be anti-religious or anything else. This is their natural inclination. And that doesn't mean that this has to become the norm. We have to accept this is a possible position. We should accept that there are people like this. It doesn't mean that we have to make the norm according to those people. The same with like you said, the lack of privacy. There may be, again, same question. Do you accept that there are people who have this dysphoria, this lack of correlation between their physical body and the way that they feel themselves to be, male or female? And even if you accept that there are people who have this dysphoria, that doesn't mean that everybody else has to say, okay, so you go into which dressing room do you go into goes by the way you feel. No, it goes by your physical organs, because this is what everybody is. This is where everybody is. It's going to be going to the room by something that's the same for everyone, and you can't allow it that just everybody decides what room they're going into, what dressing room or bathroom or so on that they're going into. So can we try and draw a line here of a position that's a possible position and a possible reaction, and something that we can try and present to other people and to the world, that we accept that there are individuals. I'm not saying we have to, I'm suggesting this as an option, that we accept that there are people who, for them, this is very real, and we don't have to reject what they're experiencing. And at the same time, they can't expect that that the world is going to run according to that, because the majority of the world is going to break up into these, the majority of the world is going to remain in the male and female separation of body and the way they feel about themselves and about sexual attraction and so on. So how's that for a certain option of trying to, as you said, Mark, before, of trying to discuss? I'm trying here not to say you're crazy or you're primitive. I'm trying to say let's try and talk about this. Is this an option? Eliezer, go ahead.
I'm a little confused about how we're discussing this. Like, is it just a philosophical discussion among the five of us? Because I think that even with our differences, the five of us could live together very well.
Yeah.
In separate rooms, of course. Or would it be, something that we would want the halakha to adopt, or Judaism, some official organ of Judaism to adopt? Because I mean, personally, I don't really know how I feel about the specific issue. I think when you said that there were two men who are trying to obey the letter of the Torah and still, enjoy each other's company, I thought that was pretty touching, that people are trying to abide by the laws of Judaism, at least by the basic laws of Judaism.
Yep.
But what really bothers me is, and I think there's a real danger to Judaism as we know it, is people trying to declare that a certain aspect of the halakha is the halakha, that people have to, and even to legislate it, which is what's happening now. And you mentioned a while ago that the halacha says that you shouldn't violate the Sabbath to save the life of a goy. And of course, Rav Soloveitchik found a way to around that.
He's not the only one.
Yeah, as probably every decent rabbi found a way around that.
It's more than that. It's accepted today that it's permissible.
Well, in the
Could
current
do
law,
what? I'm
that's
sorry, I
being
didn't hear what he
considered-
said.
To do something which is desecrating Shabbat, which is Chilul Shabbat, to save the life of a non-Jew.
Well, there's a law that's being considered in Knesset now
Thank you.
that
Yeah, I
people,
understand, but even if that law is accepted, I would say that would not be included in it because you can't function in a hospital without saving everyone's life on Shabbat.
Right.
what if somebody comes in with a heart attack and you say, well, send him to another hospital because he's not Jewish.
I
You
think
can't do that.
I think we're past that one. I think that's been
We're past
accepted
that.
by so
Okay.
many people scheme that we don't have to discuss that one.
Okay, but there
Let's-
are,
let's
there
hope
are
so.
other, yeah.
Let's hope
exactly.
so.
But
And listen, you could say it's the reason. You could say it's just the way to attach the change to an existing halacha. The reason given is because the world is so global today, and if we don't desecrate Shabbat to save someone who's not Jewish, somewhere else in the world, someone's not going to, save a Jew's life. So it's because nefesh for Jews to save the
We have to
non-Jews.
do it.
So that's one way of giving the framework, the halachic framework of how to do it. And I could discuss it philosophically in a different way, but I'm just saying I think that's been accepted as a halachically accepted ruling, and I don't think that should be even if other things that you're not happy about, or maybe I'm not happy about, are going to be discussed. I don't think this should enter into this discussion at all. Because
okay,
it's
so
been accepted. But what you're saying is right about some other details.
what about, renting
Before.
an apartment to a non-Jew? Something
Exactly.
like that.
Exactly. Making a hotel that's only for heterosexual people. We only rent out our rooms to heterosexual people or
You
to
can't do that.
who don't perform idolatry, or to
About renting out rooms. The worst hotels, when I was a kid, were the ones that rented out rooms to people of different sexes. But
But they weren't married. That's different. That's right. Do you have to, if you come to a hotel to stay in a hotel, do you have to show your marriage certificate?
I need
So
to,
man, come to the desk. So they have to show their marriage certificate to be able to get the room. We're going to go to crazy boundaries. Yeah.
but I'm still concerned because I don't, you say that there was a big uproar about this proposed law, but did it come from the rabbis? I mean, like, why doesn't Sohar come up and say, this is an impossible, these portions of the law don't follow modern Judaism or something like that?
Some do. Some rabbis have said that.
I haven't.
Rabbi, can you summarize what is the specific law?
Rabbis have said it. Eliezer, but so you're saying, but that's the law. That's politics. What do you think about the Torah? Not the politics of it. How does the Torah accept it? Does the Torah really accept it? Do you really expect the Torah to accept it? I can't force the Torah upon a state that doesn't want it. But when everyone becomes Baalei Tshuva tomorrow morning, and is that going to be the law of the state of Israel? Because everyone in Israel believes that should be the law. Can the Torah accept that we're being what's the word? We're being liberal towards people who don't live by the Torah, even though we are renting them the room or the apartment or whatever.
I'd like to, yeah, Eliezer, I don't want to interrupt what you're
Well, that's
what
okay.
you're aiming for, but I'd like to back up a little bit to a comment that Tova made. I think, Tova, you mentioned the case of electricity, that in the Torah there was no mention of electricity, and yet electricity
Right.
developed, and somehow Judaism found a way to adapt to this new change. Of course, that was, that was 100 years ago. And so it seems like natural to us because it was in the past and everybody uses electricity, despite the fact that some guy said something about shutting down power plants on Shabbat. I don't know if that was like in jest or something, but in any case, we're living now in an age where things are changing. Where, let's put ourselves, what I'm trying to say is, look, let's go back 100 years and ask ourselves, okay, there's this new thing, electricity. How are we going to adapt to it? Do we resist it because it's new and we don't have any guidelines in Torah for
Right.
how to adapt to it? Or are we going to realize and understand that this is something that is happening in society and we need to adapt it to it, because if we don't, we're going to be, pretty backward. And now let's dial to our present situation, where again, we are in a situation where things are changing. Do we adapt to them? Do we allow ourselves to continue to develop guidelines that are consistent with Judaism? Or do we
Right.
resist it furiously and end up in the Dark Ages?
Right. So they are,
To take electricity as an example, I don't think I'm mistaken if I say that the reform movement accepted that we accept the electricity as a change that we have to adapt to, and we're going to.
but we didn't do that.
Shabbat, I'm not sure how much of Shabbat they actively,
Right.
but they don't prohibit electricity or driving and so on. But orthodoxy, in spite of accepting certain things, like you can have a Shah on Shabbat, and we don't have to stay in the dark on Shabbat and things like that, but set limits to it. So much
Right.
so, we even had a shiur a couple of years ago by Rabbi Dov Linzer, who claimed that we are going way beyond the letter of the law in our insistence not to accept electricity on Shabbat. He said, I think it's a good idea, but it's not, we could be much more lenient. We don't have to be so strict about it halachically, but we made a decision, and we've created a way that's not, I don't think it's even middle way. We're pretty strict about electricity on Shabbat. The only thing we accept is for certain things and not everything. If you notice that we only allow lights and air conditioning, we do not allow automatic, even when you have an automatic pilot, we're not going to be, we're set on a Shabbat, we're not going to be flying out of Israel on Shabbat and have
Right.
a pilot flown plane. So
Right.
we're very strict about electricity on Shabbat. Although we did come to terms with it, and the one thing we do accept, which is what you mentioned, Mark, is that the country is run. Meaning we don't shut down the electricity of the country on Shabbat, because that,
Right.
and again, I would say, like I said to Eliezer about the issue of saving a non-Jew's life on Shabbat, the halachic framework within which this is accepted is because of pikuach nefesh, because you
Right.
cannot shut down electricity in a modern country because people are going to die, whether it's because they're in cold Texas, God forbid, or because equipment in a hospital is going to shut down. A person needs all kinds of things for medical purposes.
Right.
They're not going to be able to function. All kinds of things won't function on Shabbat without them. Therefore, the country has to have the electricity continuing, and therefore, even in my house, there's no pikuach nefesh without electricity, but still we're going to use it because it's permitted because of pikuach
Right.
nefesh. What we're really saying is, if you're honest, I think if we're going to be honest, I think what we're really saying is, and here's where I agree with you, Mark, that yes, electricity is a fact, The modern world works with electricity, and we cannot shut down all of the electricity once a week. That's not going to happen.
Right,
But we use it for the state because the state can't function without it. But in our private homes or in our synagogues, we can have it automated, and we don't have to activate it. So we've set pretty strict boundaries in place to be able to do it. And maybe I'm saying about other things that are much less technical, that are much more, about core values. I mean, Shabbat is a core value, but about, values of family values and sexual conduct and so on. Can we make something similar? Can we say we accept that there are certain things that happen in society, but we have our boundaries? Can we take that as an example? I'm thinking of another example, but first we're gonna hear Etta, and then I'll mention my example. Go ahead, Etta.
Well, I think life is full of changes, and electricity was beneficial. It's a beneficial change to a society. Like in vitro fertilization is beneficial to people, and it should be considered kind of a blessing. But certain things can change in society, but will it hurt the society, or will it improve it, or will it take away from it? Will it start destroying it piece by piece? And I think you can't put a carte blanche about things change in society. We have to deal with it. No, we have to accept it. You don't have to accept everything because it's dangerous for society.
that's true.
I would say electricity, generally speaking, of course, yes, society benefits from it. There are also damages. There are also terrible accidents that come because of modern equipment and technology and electricity. But generally speaking, of course, electricity is a benefit. And I would say that going back to our difficult discussion of sexual boundaries, one of the things that Michael mentioned last time we spoke was the acceptance of people with a different sexual inclination, respecting them, giving them their freedom, which is a progress, which is not the way the world was in the past. That doesn't mean all of society has to be that way. And so in the same way, and I mentioned then, creating a situation where a person who very strongly feels that his sexual inclination is same-sex attraction, forcing this man and woman to marry one another, because that's the only accepted norm in society, was very detrimental in the past. So detrimental that people suffered through their lives, and we don't even know about it because they weren't allowed to talk about it. And saying to these people, do not marry this man and woman, don't marry one another, that's not going to work, you're going to cause one another terrible damage, might be a benefit that we take from a renewed acceptance. But as I said before, that doesn't mean we have to accept that everything is equal. Can we make a certain kind of balance there, like we did with is it comparable to electricity? I'm not sure. I would like to take another example. Yeah, go ahead, Michael.
Just real quick, one answer that I think you already said it earlier, but it's not accepted by the other side, is modesty. People can live the way they want to, and do so in privacy, and no one is offended, and no one has their rights removed, and society can move along. But when they refuse to do that and insist that everything be in your face all the time, I think it causes problems.
Somebody told me, I'm sorry, somebody told me that the reason they do it, they come to you. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Etta, you were saying?
I was saying that modesty is even for different sexes too. I mean, when you have too much public, things like on a part, we're not just talking about kissing or everything. I'm talking about a lot of other things. It's just, there has to be a time and a place for everything. And I think for the majority, maybe not everybody, I think people are more accepting of people that are attracted to same sex. I think it's when they want to say, that I want you to call me a girl now because that's how I identify. I think when they want to say I was reassigned at birth the wrong thing and they need to change my birth certificate, that's when it gets crazy. When, I mean, it just, the pendulum went too far, I think, on a lot of things.
Okay, I think we have to separate, and Tova, right away, 1 second. I think we have to separate acceptance, as I said before, I'm suggesting this. I'm making a suggestion of maybe accepting that there are people who are out of the norm, but that doesn't mean that everything should be run that way. And what Michael was saying, that we should, you know, you don't have to put everything out there in the open. Even in heterosexual relationships, you don't have to, it doesn't have to be put out in the open. And even without, you know, a man and a woman, men or women shouldn't be walking, you know, we don't want, Judaism does not want people walking around like we're in Gan Eden. We're not in Gan Eden anymore. That's, you know, we're not there. And it's not healthy for the world. So this is something that I think we can say along the line, and it doesn't matter, same sex or not same sex. It's a matter of a value that we do not want to accept. But on the other end, again, where do we say there is something that we can accept? It doesn't have to be a secret. You don't have to put it in your face, as you said before, Michael. But it also, can we say not in your face, but also it doesn't have to be kept a secret. Or as I said before, you can't, I don't want to accept that I go into a men's room or a men's dressing room and some woman is going to walk in and say, well, I'm a man, you know, I don't want that. And I think as a society, we can say, no, that's something that we don't have to accept. It doesn't mean that there is no one person in the world who truly has this dysphoria and has a need for a new definition of who they are and what they are, and can we discuss that up to a certain extent? And again, going back to the electricity example, there are some things that it might be beneficial for society to accept. Doesn't mean we have to take everything that it's throwing in our face.
Right.
Tova.
Yeah, I apologize. I thought you were talking to your husband. That's why I started talking. You turned to your husband and you were talking to him. So I thought, I didn't know you were, I apologize. Didn't mean to interrupt. Just wanted to say that about that maybe the people, the gays are having the parades because they're doing it, saying in your face because they feel very, very persecuted. If they were not persecuted, maybe they wouldn't demonstrate their behavior in public. If there wasn't so much anti by society, so maybe they wouldn't do that. I don't know. I'm just thinking that why would anybody go to on parades, to say, tell you how they live? Who cares, But I guess it's I don't know.
Say, Tova, to strengthen what you're saying, the term in Hebrew used for gay is ga'ava. It's like a pride, right? It's a gay parade is a pride parade.
Right.
And you find people rejecting the gay parades because they're saying there's nothing to be proud about.
What are they proud of?
Right. But I think what they're saying, and I discussed this with some gay people, I
Right.
think what they're saying is we don't want to have to hide. And again,
Right.
the extremes are feeding one another.
Right.
If you go against anything, then they're going to
Exactly.
and say, I want my flag to be accepted.
Right.
Can it be accepted? And I don't think it's accepted right now in the gay circles, because, I don't think they would accept if I said to them, you can be whatever you want, but please don't raise a flag about it, because that's
Right.
a lot of difficulties. I don't think they're
Right.
going to say that either. And can we together look for a way for society to function where we accept, but we don't have to raise flags, neither heterosexual or.
Exactly. Exactly.
It's a long journey. We're not
It is.
there. I want to raise another example, an interesting example. And this is the example of the questions of abortion, which, as you all know, in the United States has gone from one extreme to the other. And who knows where the pendulum is going to go. now if, if they nominate more judges to the Supreme Court in the USA, or what happens in the next president's term, whoever that will be, and so on. The terminology used in the USA, please correct me if I'm mistaken, but I think I have the right terminology, not the right terminology. What is the ongoing terminology is you are either pro-life or pro-choice.
Mhm.
And again, this is black and white. You have to decide, am I pro-life or pro-choice? And I think that's all wrong. And Judaism is much more intricate about this issue.
Right.
We are both pro-life and pro-choice, but it's the question of the balance between the two. And it's not,
Right.
there's a tremendous difference between choice about how I live my life and about it's influencing someone else's life. And, the pro-choice, what's the term I'm looking for?
I think you're looking for abortion. You're looking for abortion. In Judaism, you have this notion of rodef.
Thank you. The pro-choice position is saying it's my body. I can do whatever I want with my body, but that's not the whole story. There is an emphasis here that has to be considered. Is he part of your body, or is this an independent life, or maybe dependent life that has to be considered? And the pro-choice, and then I'm sorry, the pro-life has to consider. If it goes to the Catholic extreme of under no circumstances can there be any abortion. If a woman was raped, if her life is in danger, we're pro-life. That's not pro-life.
Right.
If you can't consider her life, that's not pro-life. And it's just another example of how certain parts of the world, and to some extent it's here in Israel, but it's not as extreme. And maybe thanks to Judaism, it's not as extreme, because, but in the States, it's certainly very extremist. You're either pro-life or pro-choice, and if you're pro-life, the pro-choice people are cursing you.
Protesting.
Vice versa, much worse than protesting. and Israel, the halakha is much more complex in a positive way about this.
Right.
There are different situations. You don't have an abortion just because I feel like it. What influence is this going to have on this woman's life, on this family's life, whether it's an immediate physical danger to her life, or something that will even be extremely detrimental to her development. A 16-year-old girl is pregnant and or she has psychological difficulties, psychiatric difficulties, and can accept this or not. These are considerations. I'm not giving a halachic verdict here.
Right.
These are things that are taken into consideration in the broad picture of where do we draw the line when an abortion is accepted halachically, it's permitted, or is forbidden halachically. And so I'd like to take this example, Dafka, an example where the world, or some part of the world, is talking in black and white and not really considering what each other is saying, whereas halakha looks at the different sides and tries to give a list of considerations, things to take into consideration, and based on which, in an intricate way, a psak will be there will be a psak for a different psak for different situations. Maybe this again can be something that we can look up to as a way of how to look at different situations that are thrown in our way in the modern world. Mark.
I think the issue of abortion is a very interesting issue. And one of the reasons I think that it's very interesting is because of the choice of words. How can you not be pro-life?
How can you not be pro-choice?
How can you not be pro-choice? In other words, the choice of words forces you to not debate properly. It forces you to take a stand without any ability for nuance whatsoever.
Right.
And I think the whole discussion that we're having here is the need to have nuance, to have, yes, we have to be firm about this. Yes, we have to be firm about that. But there is a boundary between. There
Right.
is a connection holding us together, because if there is no connection holding us together, we will be apart. And the choice of words, I think, is extremely important. And the example of abortion is an excellent example
Yeah,
where the choice of words forces us to be apart.
right.
Thank you. And the nuance is very important. Being able to have nuance is true in all of these discussions.
So I agree with Mark 100%. That's really the way to characterize the problem that we're having today. Yeah, Mark, I said that. The problem with the discussion, certainly in the United States and probably elsewhere in the world, is that by defining it the way they do, they have to insist, if you're pro-choice, that there is no life to protect, or there's only one, and that's the woman that's been impregnated. There is no other life to consider. And they will defend that to birth, and in some cases even beyond birth. I think I said last time, if you're going to define, a legal abortion up until the time of birth, then what about your 13-year-old? Do you really want that kid around? And until we can come to some sense of reality about what the issues really are, it's very difficult to find common ground with people that are so firmly on one side or the other. To impose the Catholic definition of when life begins on everybody is never going to work. Not everybody's Catholic. Most people are not. Judaism and the way we look at things is actually used as a weapon in this discussion in the States, and on both sides, because the Reform movement considers abortion to be real Judaism, and you know how we look at it. So there is no easy answer here that I see.
Okay, but I think it's a good example of how we can not only we, but how the world can possibly look for more complex and complete, because when you don't have complexity, you're choosing one extreme, you're certainly losing the aspects of value in the other extreme. And by having complexity, some people look at it always as compromise. You're not really going all the way to any one value, just kind of looking from to be wishy-washy. And I think that this is the idea of complexity as completion, because we are taking into consideration the different sides of the issue, is a more, I would consider it a more complete way to look, maybe at every issue, certainly at many issues.
Okay. Sounds
Yeah.
interesting.
Something?
Can I ask a very silly question, not connected to anything we discussed? What is sorry.
Eliezer, did you want to say something?
Oh, thanks. No, I completely agree with Mark and with Michael. And so,
Boring session. We're all agreeing with one another.
yeah.
Mark doesn't like it. He wants action.
Too much.
Please, anybody, how much do I keep when I put on the heater? How much do I put my heating system on? How much do I put it on? How many degrees?
Your heating
I know
system?
it sounds silly.
Like 20, it depends. My neighbors put it on like 26. I do 23 sometimes, but it just, it depends
it
on
on 20.
how good it works.
20